Well, this is the Rivalry Podcast. It's Jace, JP, your garbage-free college football podcast focused on the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry, brought to you by our friends at Elevated Integrity Construction. And we have got a really special guest with us today. It's our boy Jeremy from Meep Meep Nation, UTSA Roadrunner account. Jeremy, thanks for making time to hang out with us today, man.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for the invite.
So let's start with this. So it's kind of a weird marriage here: Ohio State, Michigan, and UTSA. Just tell me a little bit about yourself, Jeremy, and how you became a Roadrunner fan.
Yeah, man. So, my following of UTSA football kind of happened during our conception. So, around 2013, I was a freshman at UTSA. Before coming to UTSA, I wasn't really a huge college football fan. I mostly just watched the NFL and, coming here to UTSA and even though we were such an early program, being the Alamo Dome, experiencing that kind of atmosphere, and just being a college student in general, being on campus, you kind of just get sucked into this very different culture that I think if you're just a fan of a professional football team, but you've never been sort of a fan of a college or university that you went to, it's kind of hard to describe. And so when you're in that kind of environment for 4 years, you kind of end up getting sucked into the team and following them long term. And coincidentally, the launch of the football team around 2010, 2011 was also around the time when we launched Meep Meep Nation. So that's 2013. Initially, we were called UTSA Memes. It was literally just like tongue in cheek, throwing memes out there. This was back during like the first sort of conception of memes into the mainstream. So before that wasn't a huge thing. And then going to 2010, 11, 12, 13, a lot of people start creating, meme page accounts. And so just started a page, just like kind of poke fun at things that people were experiencing in college. And over time, it kind of became more focused on the football program. And then Caleb Hopkins, the other co-founder, he came in, helped with the whole rebranding effort. And we went from UTSA Memes to Meep Meep Nation, where we started to sort of follow and track all the sports that UTSA is involved in. So I guess right now, almost a decade later, I'm sort of like conjoined with the football team unofficially, where it almost feels like, the success that they have is like, I feel like I have some success from it. Yeah. No, it's been a long journey. And I think it's been really rewarding though, too.
I love, Kirk Herbstreit was talking about after the Washington-Oregon game on Saturday about how he does, Thursday night football. You kind of reference pro versus college, how he does Thursday night football. It's like, and that's awesome. And I love it. But you only get this on a Saturday night in college, it's a completely different animal. And I think that's why, why both the rivalry and Meep Meep Nation, why we love college football so much is it's just the emotion of it is just completely different. It really is. Yeah. Let's assume for a second that, because there's probably not a ton of crossover audience here, let's assume that most of our, at least the folks here at the rivalry, let's assume we've watched all of 30 seconds of UTSA football this year. What is about the midseason mark now? Like, what's one or two things that somebody listening to the podcast that goes, okay, cool, I'll check out the game. You guys play FAU this weekend. What's something that you could give them to kind of catch them up to speed on what the season's been like so far for the Roadrunners?
Yeah, I think
it's a huge question, I realize.
Yeah, and I appreciate you giving me a bit of a heads up. I had to really think over that. Because, again, we're a 10-year-old program, right? That's like a joke compared to some of these programs, such as y'all's, been around for 100 plus years. We're barely a baby. And so contextually, I'm really, and a lot of fans are viewing this season really through the lens of Traylor coming in. So we've gone through 3 head coaches right now. The guy who started it was Larry Coker, so former Miami national champ, and so he did a really great job taking us off and sort of building the program. And then as we went from FCS to FBS, we kind of started to struggle a bit more, and a lot of that had to do with the rosters we were bringing in. We were struggling to find a QB, struggling to find a lot of the position players we needed. And so ended up replacing Coker with a guy from LSU, the top recruiter, Frank Wilson, and he did a really, really good job of bringing in some top talent. And we were doing okay there, and then I think still struggling, not getting to where we wanted to be as far as being conference contenders within Conference USA. And so Traylor comes in, right before the pandemic, I think a year before that, and first year with him in was kind of lackluster, not a whole lot of noise, and then 2021, we really kind of exploded on the stage. So we started to go undefeated. I think we're 6 or 7-0 before we ended up getting ranked. And then, to be a 10-year-old college football program and to be ranked and hear your name, on all the main broadcasts was like mind blowing for all the fans and everyone involved. And, people were talking about the NY6 Bowl potential, and it was just, a lot of momentum going there. And there was a contingent of the fan base that was like, okay, this is a Cinderella story. It's going to end really quickly. The carriage is going to turn into a pumpkin, and then we're going to be back to a no-name FBS school really quickly. But, we were able to do really, really well, go into the American Conference Championship, win that 2020, or the Conference USA Championship, win that 2021. And then 2022, people were like, okay, are we going to do this again? We had most of our same roster. We had pretty much all of our staff. It was like, okay, there should be nothing to stop us. And lo and behold, we do it again, right? We end up getting ranked again. We end up winning back-to-back conference championships. And now we're just spoiled, right? You're like 11, 12-year-old program. You're winning back-to-back championships. You're showing up as ranked on all these TVs and polls. And it's just like, going into this season, that's the context. So going through the season, sky's the limit. Like, this is the first season we're going in where you've got people, big names on TV, talking heads saying UTSA could be ranked their first game or their second game. And so there was just ridiculously high expectations. NY6 was really a big focus for us. So I think between us and Tulane, we were sort of the front runners in that conversation. And then, the Houston game happened, and, that kind of kicked us down a notch really quickly. And that one hurt quite a bit because if anyone's not familiar, UTSA is in San Antonio. We're a stone throws away from Houston. And so in a lot of ways, at least for football, we kind of view them as I guess like an unsanctioned rival. And there's a few reasons for that. When UH launched their stadium, TDCU in Houston, UTSA played them back in 2014. This was back during the Larry Coker era, and we actually beat them. And so we kind of like jokingly call it TD UTSA Stadium, having messed up their inaugural game. And then coming into last year, there was a triple overtime game against Houston where they beat us in the Albadome by, I think, like a field goal. And that was really holding pretty heavy on us. And so coming into this season, we're like, this is a revenge game. Not only are we going to basically, take back what you guys took from us last season, but we're also going to spoil, hopefully, your inaugural game in the Big 12. And so, we're riding really heavy, really high, and everything that could go wrong went wrong. Like, we weren't the team we thought we were. Lots of interceptions, a lot of blown coverage. It was just a really messy game. And I think it humbled us quite a bit. Took a lot of air out of our lungs. And then as we progressed through the season, we played Army and then we played Tennessee. And I think if you ask anyone in the preseason how we would look this season, most people, even casual fans, would have said maybe a 1-2 loss team, right? You're playing Tennessee, in Knoxville. You're going to lose that most likely. So there's one loss there, and then maybe just one throw-in loss. And if you're somebody like me who drinks the Kool-Aid every season, you're going to be like, you're going to go undefeated, And so, after losing to Houston, we end up losing to Army at home. Army just has this really good run-your-mouth football where they'll just do the same play, literally like running it right up the middle. And what was disappointing is like we just had no answer to that. And it was at home. Yeah. And it was just, that was really at that point we realized, okay, something's off, something's wrong. And contextually, you guys should know, like, the biggest changes UTSA has had is really just we lost our OC, our offensive coordinator. Will Stein ended up going to Oregon, and you guys have seen how well he's doing there. And then we lost Zachary Franklin, our number 2 or number 3 wide receiver, and he ended up going to Ole Miss. But we're still a stacked team. We have most of our vets. Frank Harris, who's been here for like 50 years now, he's still playing QB, and we've got Traylor, we've got a lot of really good staff, and so it was kind of confusing going through the season. What exactly was going wrong. But I think contextually, if you kind of view UTSA right now through that lens of this is a team that has won 2 conference championships back to back, they've been ranked for 2 seasons, and they've kind of just had a rough start right now, you might have a good idea of what can happen. Because I think right now, from what I've seen, especially the past 2 games against Temple, against UAB, the big issue really has just been with Frank Harris. He went through multiple surgeries in the offseason. So coming into this season, he was really rusty. And then dealing with a new offensive coordinator, obviously that's always going to be kind of iffy. And then when you got a genius like Will Stein, who I genuinely believe is going to be a head coach within the next 4 or 5 years, that's a pretty big hit when it comes to trying to remaneuver your offense and your strategy. But if you watch the UAB game, the Temple game, the past 2 games, I think you'll finally start to see glimmers of the team that UTSA was the past 2 games. And I think right now, if you want to get in on a level where there's not a whole lot of fanfare and nobody is going to accuse you of being a bandwagoner once we win the American, now's the time to get in. But yeah, that's just a little bit of a long-winded but contextual, rundown of our short history.
Well, and the schedule is pretty favorable moving forward for you guys too. I mean, you're obviously through the Tennessee game, right. And I think at least from an outside perspective, obviously every game on the schedule remaining is winnable, and I would say you're probably favored in all of them except maybe Tulane at the end of the year, which depending on how things fall, you could still be talking about a New Year's Six or something of that nature, depending on what happens with teams like Air Force and all that sort of thing too. JP, for the UTSA audience here in kind of the cross promotion, like what's something to kind of position folks for what Ohio State has looked like this year? Like if people are just jumping in here pre-Penn State week.
Yeah. If you're jumping in pre-Penn State week, I mean, the biggest question for Ohio State has been McCord and been injuries for us. So I think going into this week, you got to have Emeka Ibuka. You got to have him healthy. You have to have Travion healthy. McCord has to have another solid performance like at Notre Dame. No turnovers. He's got to have a clean game. But it's going to be interesting. I mean, if you're unfamiliar with Ohio State, Penn State's going to be a good game to give you a glimpse at who they are. So
I think that's solid. That's solid.
Jeremy, you talked about how UTSA is a relatively new program. In your time since being a fan, what is one win that, as a fan, like you, at lunchtime, you're going and watching replays of that? Jace and I both do this during our lunch break.
It's very sad. We're very lonely at work.
And I'm also a Rutgers fan. I only have like 5 games to choose from. But we will go back and watch like monuments. Like I've already watched the Notre Dame game from this season. I couldn't even tell you how many times. What game is that for a UTSA fan?
There you go. Yeah. Not a whole lot of film footage to look back on, but, I think the games that really stick out are really mostly in the trailer era. So the one that hits me right on the nose is UAB 2021 season, sort of our first, breakthrough season, first ranked team win season. We're going to UAB is coming into the Alamo Dome, packed crowd for us, 45 something thousand people. And basically UAB is winning the game with less than a minute under the clock. They're up by 1 possession, and this is a heartbreaker for us because at this point in the season, we're ranked, I think, number 22. Everyone's talking about, NY6 Bowl, what bowl are we going to? These are the next UCF, whatever, And so UAB now, like this unranked, technically no name team, but they are a really, really good team historically, comes in, is our house, and they're beating us. And we've only got 30 seconds on the clock. And historically, before trailer, we did not do a good job winning those type of matchups. If you saw, a lead going into the fourth quarter that wasn't ours, we're probably gonna lose that game. And so it was really stressful. People were like, hey, they're hearing the clock toll, and it was just like, hey, this is it. And so it goes to the point where there's 4 seconds on the clock. Frank Harris, our QB, has gotten us into the red zone, and we've got enough time for one play. That's it. And Frank runs back, just lobs the ball just like real slow lob. It bounces off one of the UAB defender's hands. He doesn't grab onto it, goes up 5 feet in the air, and then our 250-pound tight end, Oscar Cardenas, somehow manages to just turn his whole body, grab that ball, and just protect it like it's his first child. And like he lands on the floor, and we end up winning by possession. And it was just like my hair on my back stands still when I think about that. And if you watch the YouTube replays, I guess the announcer, the broadcaster, he sounds exactly like Ed Orgeron. So it's like it adds a little bit of extra oomph to it. Probably one of the most, I guess, emotionally broadcasted games I've ever heard. And I don't think he had anything to do with any connection with our program outside of just like being a broadcaster. So highly recommend, watching those highlights. Really, really good time.
JP, I'm going to ask you the same question, then I'll answer it too, just again for some context for the UTSA audience. What is one of the most elating wins as an Ohio State fan? And I understand it's going to come at my expense, but just go ahead. It's fine. Because my answer is going to come at your expense here in a second.
That's fine. I know your answer already. Mine, oh man. There's just so many. It's different because we've been blessed to be able to go to a couple of games recently. Like we were at Notre Dame this past season, like this season, where the final seconds, everybody in that stadium thought Ohio State was going to lose. And I'm trying to control myself as a media person on the end zone, right where it's about to happen. And all these Notre Dame fans are screaming, celebrating. I'm going from like super mad that we've just lost this game. I'm going to have to drive home in a car with stupid Jace and his smile. and we go in and we pull it out. Like it is hard to top that because I was there. But I will say, I remember exactly where I was when it was number 1 Ohio State and number 2 Michigan. I remember specific plays. We just got done actually last week filming an episode with Roy Hall, who called a touchdown pass in that game.
Because that would have been 2006.
2006. Chris Beanie Wells. I remember the run right up the gut, 52 yards to the house. Just everything about that game, the hype behind it. I had grown up obviously hating Michigan, knowing the rivalry, knowing how fierce it was. But that was the first time that I could actively remember both teams being unbelievably good at the same time. So there was extra hype all around it. I will never forget exactly where I was. I was at my friend Catherine's house, sitting on the living room floor, watching it with her dad. Stayed the whole time.
Where was she?
Her and literally all of my other friends were gone, like in some other room, hanging out and doing stuff. I was the only kid that like had wanted nothing to do with that, and I was all football. It was just amazing. I was planted there.
I mean, you already probably know my answer.
I know, just say it.
After so much suffering in Ann Arbor, but I mean, 2021 has to be the kind of your experience with Notre Dame. Like my brother and I, like he had been a couple years prior, had been diagnosed with late stage cancer, and he had beat it, and he's doing well now. But it was kind of one of those things where like he and I have both my dad's a huge Michigan fan, so we both grew up with that. And we had decided, it was like after the Rutgers game in 21, which Michigan didn't even look that good. And we said, you know what, we've never been to a Michigan Ohio State game. Like, let's just buy tickets. We got them for a couple $100, which for Michigan Ohio State is dirt cheap. We said, yeah, why not? Who knows? Let's just do it. And of course, Michigan ends up winning that game, kind of getting the monkey off their back. It's snowing, crowds rushing the field. We're rushing the field. There's pictures of me just kind of on my back in the end zone, the happiest I've ever been. I mean, it's hard to get better than that. Again, it kind of comes back to the reason why we love college ball, right? It's the emotion of the thing. There's just nothing quite like beating your biggest rival or getting that last second touchdown. Like it's one of those things that you watch that replay again and again and again. On the flip side of that, there are also those deflating losses that you just cannot get out of your head. And Jeremy, I'll start with you. Like, what's one of the ones that just sticks out to you? Like, oh, if I could change just one game, this would be the one.
You picked a good season to ask that question. I would say it's the Houston game this season. We were 5,000 feet high going into this season. I mean, this is the first season where it was just like nobody had anything bad to say about us. Like the worst thing anyone could say was, "Oh, you lost Zakari to Ole Miss," or you lost your offensive coordinator. But the main guys, Trailer every season, it's always like, "Is he going to leave? Is he going to leave?" Right? Last season it was like, "Oh," or the previous season before last, Texas Tech is coming. Previous season before that, you have other P5 schools coming, and so far he hasn't left. And so when you have that kind of commitment from your head coach, and then you're doing so well in the past few seasons, you're just running high. And so this season, losing to Houston was just a huge come down, realizing that, hey, we've still got some work to do. We're not invincible. And the Houston game really just hurt a lot, just because, as I mentioned previously, they had come into our dome and they had beat us into triple overtime. And secondly, the Houston basically contract was signed way back in, I think, 2011 or 2012. So this was back when Houston kind of viewed us as like a cupcake, easy win program, scheduled them for homecoming
money, and then you go home.
Exactly. And so with the games that we've played so far, I think the contract ended this season. And so I don't know, with them being in the Big 12, if they're ever going to be interested in signing another contract, which really sucks, because I feel like there's really a really nice rivalry that's organically grown from us. So that part also hurts, is like you're never going to be able to get vengeance from that game. And then obviously, potentially losing your NY6 game or NY6 bid and all that stuff just really hurt. And I think it really did weigh on our team going into Army, and up until at least I would say Temple. You could kind of see that there was just this level of like, man, we've got a knot in our chest still. We're not playing with like, I guess, the swagger that we were playing with, previously. And I think we're slowly starting to build that up again. But in our short history, I guess that's not too bad of a loss to say that you had. But it's definitely the worst one that I can remember personally.
JP, dive deep into the pain, my friend. Please.
See, it doesn't even take me that long. Like, obviously, the Michigan losses hurt. The most devastating one was Georgia last year in the college football playoffs, of going up against a team that I feel like nobody gave Ohio State a chance. You're going into that game fully expecting to lose, but knowing you have the talent to pull it out and win. You go in there, CJ goes out and plays a heck of a game, probably, I would say confidently, the best game of his Ohio State career.
I'd agree with that.
He absolutely plays dominant. You have a chance to win it. I felt like there were certain things, and we had talked about it on the podcast, there were certain coaching decisions in that game that I thought were huge mistakes that cost them that game. And you still had a chance to win it in the final seconds on a field goal to go to a championship where, honestly, I strongly believe if Ohio State wins that game, we're walking away national champs. We're beating TCU, and we're walking away with the championship. So coming that close, doing everything you can, you are in control for a majority of the game, and you lose it on a heartbreaker field goal in the last second. I think about that game all the time and what should have been. And I think that's what hurts the most. If it was a regular season game, it would still suck. But the fact that it was in the college football playoffs, we were in Atlanta, we were on their home field, we were a field goal away from essentially winning a championship, and we missed it by just a little bit. Just keeps me up at night. I hate it.
Yes, very sad. Very sad. Anyway, I will go with you and go outside of the rivalry for this one. And again, this is probably prisoner of the moment recency bias. Like, part of me doubts that Georgia is actually the most devastating loss you've experienced, but it's probably the most recent.
Yeah.
And I would say
Purdue's up there for
I would say for me, it's probably like, I feel like a lot of people assume that I'll say like Appalachian State, but the reality is that like, even at that point, like, cause that would have been 2007, 2008, somewhere in there. I would have been, and this will date myself, like I would have been late high school, but there's a difference between being late high school and like being in your 30s, right? Where you're like actively following every game. I don't even think I was watching that particular game. So like, it didn't hurt me as much. Michigan State 2021, I think, is the most recent one that I'm like, ooh, like right in the gut, because obviously, like, and this makes a lot of sense leading into playing Michigan State this weekend. Michigan State is just has so much hatred from me. Lots of hate in my heart. There's plenty for you too, JP, but like plenty of hate in my heart for Michigan State. And being in East Lansing, and Michigan being up by 15 in that game, and then blowing the lead in the second half in just a phenomenal performance by Kenneth Walker. So good that he made Mel Tucker look like a good football coach, which is really like one of the greatest miracles ever recorded.
Can you imagine signing that coach to a 10-year, $95 million contract?
I hope he's paying Ken Walker. Like he deserves it. But like the other piece of that game too, and I don't know if you guys would remember this, the way that it keeps me up at night is Michigan had a play at the end of the first half where Aiden Hutchinson sacked Peyton Thorne and stripped the ball out, and David Ajabo fell on it in the end zone for a touchdown. And they ruled it a touchdown on the field. It may have been the other way. It may have been Ajabo who stripped it and Hutch who fell on it. But either way, stripped the ball out, fell on in the end zone. Really would have salted that game away pretty early. They went back and determined that it was indisputable that Peyton Thorne's shin was down. They overturned the touchdown, and Michigan, of course, ends up losing that game by like 3 or 4 points. There is no way in heck. I've watched that replay 1,000 times. There's no way that is indisputable to reverse the call.
I thought it was a phenomenal call.
Well, I'm sure you do. And
I thought it was great.
It's one in a long history of very questionable time clock refereeing decisions that have come out of East Lansing. And so I have no idea what to expect this weekend. I'm sure something stupid will happen, and I'll tweet about it angrily at RivalPod. But that's one that really grinds my gears for sure.
And so now we're a good chunk of the way through the season at this point. What are some expectations? Like when you look at where you guys thought you would be at the start of the season to where you are now, have you guys exceeded those expectations? Is the fan base of the Roadrunners feeling right now?
We're holding our breath. I think most of us are. Right now, the team we've seen, especially during the UAB game, that's a team that definitely can compete with everybody in our conference right now. Like when you mentioned, we're favored right now to win every game. However, there's a big asterisk there because just because you're favored by 56% does not mean you have overwhelming odds. And I think this season has just been so weird, even outside of the American, where you have a lot of teams that, historically have been really good, or maybe they even had some really big wins, but then they have some big losses that get thrown in as well. And so with UTSA right now, obviously we have FAU coming up, and historically FAU, who's FAU? What are they doing? But they're a good team. They beat USF by 56-14, and USF, by the way, was neck and neck with Bama up until like the second or third quarter. Yeah. So these are like, I'm like, I'm not a magician when it comes to stats, but when I see numbers on the TV, I'm like, okay, something isn't adding up here. And so, a lot of these teams that you're seeing in the American, like even Rice, right? Rice is another team that historically no one wants to get beaten by a food, and historically very few people have. And the reality is Rice did this season what we couldn't do. They beat Houston. And that's saying something. And so there's literally nobody in our conference schedule right now who we can really underestimate. Maybe East Carolina, they're kind of struggling a little bit right now, but historically, they've also been a really good team. And so I think it's going to be something where I think Coach Traylor had an interview earlier this week where he's like, I don't like being too happy anymore. Like I want to be mad. I want to be angry. And so I think we're kind of like coming out right now, Dark Knight Rises mode, where it's like, hey, we've gotten humbled. We got a lot of little sticks in our shoulders and grains of sand in our throat, and we're just trying to like crawl our way back. And I think with a team like UTSA, where historically, we've always been an underdog, we kind of thrive off that energy. And so I definitely think, talent wise, skill wise, we have what it takes to be competitive. We've lost very few people, thankfully, when it comes to injuries. Frank Harris was out for a while, but he came back. The only guy who's kind of questionable is one of our top receivers, DeClorian Clark. He got a little bit of an injury, and I think right now the way it looks is coach is probably going to redshirt him, so he has a better chance next year to make an impact with NFL recruiters and whatnot. But we still have Cephas. We've got I think a 6'5" receiver in Taikio Kellogg, and when you got a guy like Frank who has like essentially decades now of experience in college football, like that's not saying nothing. And so I think we have the ability to compete with everyone. And then I think Tulane is really going to be the battle of the giants where, if we are who we say we are, we'll have to beat them there. But I think, if you're a fan who's been following UTSA, don't get too down. I think, we're just getting sort of some of the knots out. And I think right now the season is still all ahead of us. However, at the same time, if you're a UTSA fan, don't get too high. I think outside of maybe Eastern Carolina, if we play the way we played against Houston, if we play the way we played against Army, it's very possible that we literally only win one game. And so I think it's really game by game. If we can just stay healthy, we can still just like have that chip on our shoulder when we play, and just keep doing what we were doing the past two games. We'll be okay. But yeah, it's maybe not the most clear answer, but I think right now it's just sort of like anything's possible. We just gotta keep grinding it out.
Well, that's some of the beauty of college football is, when for guys like the three of us who try to analyze this in our, when we're not doing our day jobs, it's fun because at the end of the day, we can analyze to death, but it's also 18 to 22-year-old college students who are playing football in between exams, and anything can happen. And I think, even on the outside of the conferences on a national stage this year, this is as wide open a race for national title, for New Year's Six, for some of these big bowl games, as I can remember in a while. There's, on the national stage, there's, I would say 7, if not 8 teams that all have a legitimate chance at winning a national title this year. And for both JP and I, obviously being Michigan, Ohio State guys, that's kind of where the bar is at right now. Is that's the expectation in Columbus and in Ann Arbor is that's great that it is. It's very much, you mentioned kind of being spoiled. It's the spoiled mentality of like, yeah. We won double-digit wins. That's great. Have you won a national title this decade?
Did you beat that team? Yeah. Did you win a title or did you beat that team?
Yeah. Well, and on the Michigan side too, it's even stupider because I look back and I go, you guys realize that like 10 years ago, Michigan was going like 3-9 and 5-7. You guys remember the Brady Hoke Rich Rod years? Because I certainly do. But that's what makes it fun. So, Jeremy, last question for you, and this is a tough one right now. And again, we're recording this on the week leading into FAU, the week leading into Michigan State, the week leading into Penn State. Right now, the 4 best teams in college football.
Yeah. So if anybody is like a pro analyst and they're like, listening to me speak, believe me, when everything I'm saying here, it's full of bias. It's full of just like gut feelings. It's full of glancing at the score half-heartedly while I'm eating a sandwich. So don't take it too seriously. Don't bet the house on it. But there you go. And then for you guys, it's going to be a very, I guess, unorthodox answer. So I totally forgot that you guys are Michigan and Buckeye fans before I made this list. But the top 2 on my list right now are Michigan and Ohio State. So
are they in that order?
Neck and neck. Michigan has the slight edge right now.
There it is. That's all I needed to say.
Like you said, he's an expert. So
there you go. I'm completely basing my opinion on AP polls. Not that most AP polls probably do a whole lot of research to begin with, but the fact that they have them ranked a little bit higher, I'm giving them a bit of an edge. But neck and neck with Michigan and Ohio State. You might be asking, why not Georgia? Why don't you have them in number 1? Going into the preseason, obviously, yeah, you're the champ. You're coming in, you're number 1. But I think Georgia is still very much benefiting from recency bias from a lot of pollsters. The average individual, you just can't watch every single game and do a breakdown of this. And so, that's a lot of times while you'll see a lot of these polls, you'll see who's voting for which team. Some of these things don't make sense. It's like, why would you do this? And so recency bias plays a big role. And so preseason, I can understand, you come in as a champ, you should be number 1. That's fine. But I think it should be just as much weighted when it comes to expectations going into the season. And with Georgia, if you actually look at the scores, even though they're undefeated, there's some really sketchy scores. UAB, for example, who UTSA just beat, they only beat them 49-21 after the fourth. But if you actually watch the game, I think it was up until the third quarter almost, they were like neck and neck. And so you can't be the number one team and be doing that. No offense to UAB, they're in our conference, but they literally just left Conference USA. Like you can't do that and be considered number one.
Well, they did the same thing with South Carolina. Now South Carolina's in a different tier, but they did the same thing with South Carolina. And even this past weekend, the way that they beat Vanderbilt was in that game. It's not, they're not and again, I know I'm biased, but they're not steamrolling teams 52-7 like Michigan is right now, or beating up on Purdue the way Ohio State is. There's playing with your food for a quarter and a half, and then there's oh my gosh, we might lose to Auburn.
Exactly. Yeah. One touchdown win with Auburn. You're like, barely beating, Vanderbilt by like 2 touchdowns. And so that kind of thing, that kind of inconsistency, like everyone's got a bad game occasionally. But that's just not, it's inexcusable. That's inexcusable to me. And so I think, well, at the end of the day, if you're undefeated, you're undefeated. I think they're, a top 4 team, but by top 4, I mean, they're 4th place. They're not, they're not anywhere in the top 3. 3rd place, I'm giving to Washington. And this is where a little more of my bias might come in. The reason I give it to Washington is really from outside the fact they're undefeated. They beat Oregon, and Oregon, obviously they have Will Stein, ex-UTSA. But if you actually look at Oregon, you look at their stats, like they're beating these teams by like 4 to 5 possessions. I think it was only Texas Tech that they beat them by, I think, like 1 touchdown. But the rest of these teams, they're absolutely steamrolling them. And if you're trying to go into playoff contention and you're a high level P5 team, that's the kind of effort, that's the kind of score that I'm expecting to see if you want to be in that top 3, or top 1 kind of talk. And if Oregon hadn't lost to Washington, I'd probably have them higher up the list as well. But Washington beating a really, really good Oregon team had them take the 3rd spot for me. So it's Michigan, Ohio State, Washington, and then Georgia.
I think that's really solid.
Yeah.
I think the other interesting piece about with Georgia too is I saw today, Brock Bowers is going to be out for, I think, 4 to 6 weeks. He's having the tightrope surgery for that ankle. I mean, will he be back in time for a playoff run? It seems like the answer to that is yes. But what happens in the interim if you're scraping, maybe not scraping by, but if you're kind of just getting by, and now suddenly one of the most dynamic players in the nation is sidelined for the back half of your season. I'm not a betting man, but if I were a betting man, I would say that coach is probably not holding on to that spot for terribly long. But I think that's really good. And JP, I don't know. Like I like Jeremy's answer. Would you differ at all there?
No, I mean, I agree with him. I agree 100% on Georgia. I think until they lose, you just can't take them out of that. But I agree. They've been shaky to me. Carson Beck has been all right, but Brock Bowers to me is that team. So I'm curious what they're going to look like with him out. I can't take it away from him. I think I would like to put somebody else there. I just don't know. I don't know who I would put over them right now.
I could see maybe an argument for Oklahoma, but yeah. I also don't know how Oklahoma over Texas is one thing, but I think we all would agree that Washington, Oregon is the winner of that game is probably the team that deserves to be.
Yeah, 100%
at least. Final thing, gentlemen. Again, it's UTSA and FAU. It's Ohio State, Penn State. It's Michigan, Michigan State. One thing, JP, I'm looking at you. One thing that your team has to do to win this weekend. And JP, go ahead and you start. I'll go. Then we'll finish with Jeremy.
Be healthy. I think you got to have Ibuka back. You got to have Travion Henderson back. I think having that on the offensive side of the ball is going to be a huge help. You're going to need every piece of offensive firepower you have to beat that defense. And luckily for Ohio State, they've had a luxury of great wide receivers. So if Ibuka is out, you've got Julian Fleming, you have Brandon Enos, you have Carnell Tate, Cade Stover, you have the best wide receiver in the nation, Marvin Harrison Jr. They're still good, but you've got to be healthy. You can't have 2 of your most dynamic offensive players out.
I'm going to ignore it.
Marvin Harrison's the best receiver.
I know. I heard you.
He is.
I'm going to ignore
Roman Wilson is a good receiver. He's not number 1. Sorry.
For Michigan, I mean, massive favorites over Michigan State right now. But Michigan State, you are always going to get their absolute best. And there's no doubt Michigan's locked in on this game, but you also have to know Michigan State is too. For Michigan, it's really simple. Don't turn the ball over. The way that you lose games like this, or let me kind of flip it, like the key recipe for success in pulling a monumental upset is you have to create turnovers. You have to win the turnover margin. You have to win it big. Michigan has done a good job with the Bowling Green game as the exception. Michigan has done a phenomenal job of they don't make mistakes. They don't turn the ball over. They are, I think, with Air Force, because God bless America, the least penalized team in the nation. If Michigan starts, I'm not concerned if the game is semi close at half, because Michigan's that boa constrictor that just sits on you and then they just have their way. I'm not concerned about that, but I am concerned if we hit halftime and Michigan's getting penalized. They've got a couple turnovers already. That's the way you lose the game. You play good, clean football. Shouldn't be an issue at all. That's the key for us. Jeremy, what about for you guys?
Yeah, I would say just don't play cute. Work with what works. You've got a stacked running back room. You've got a stacked receiving room. You've got a veteran QB. Barring any crazy injuries, go with that. Just try to run the score as much as you can. If something is not working, if the running backs aren't working, adjust the receivers. If receivers aren't working, adjust running back. But don't play cute. I think, at least the past 2 wins that we've had, while they've been good wins, there were a couple of moments where we did unnecessary plays, unnecessary trick plays, didn't lean on things that were obviously our strengths when we should have, and just overcomplicated it. You're playing right now with a team that's very veteran. We've played with a lot of teams. We played with Tennessee and Knoxville. They can handle, what's left right now on the schedule. Just keep them healthy. Don't play cute, and just try to focus on taking one game at a time and come out with the win.
Jeremy, we appreciate your time. You guys are at MeepMeep Nation across social media platforms, yes?
Yeah, you got it. Meep Meep Nation is our main, and then mine is Meep Meep Jeremy. But if you want to follow just UTSA stuff, I'm usually tweeting that on Meep Meep Nation, and we're on Facebook, YouTube, most other platforms as well.
So Rivalry fam, go ahead and give them a follow. And then for the UTSA folks, at Rival Pod, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. We've got our personal stuff there too that we retweet from time to time because we're selfish like that. So you'll find us there too. But Jeremy, thanks for the time, man. Good luck to you guys this weekend.
Hey guys, appreciate it. It's been a blast.
The Rivalry is a production of River Radio Ministries. Want live updates from the show? Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at RivalPod. Visit our Patreon and consider becoming a patron for exclusive bonus content, merch, and more. And be sure to follow us wherever you're listening now for new episodes every Tuesday. And if you like what you're hearing, tell a friend so they can listen too.